Chapter 1: The Digital Hamster Wheel. My name is Wilson Brown, and at 28, I finally realized I was living in a beautifully designed prison that I had helped build around myself. It hit me on a Wednesday evening in downtown Toronto, sitting in my sleek apartment, surrounded by all the markers of modern success. The latest iPhone buzzing with notifications, a 65-inch smart TV streaming endless content, a closet full of branded clothes I'd bought to project an image I wasn't even sure was mine. Despite having everything society told me would make me happy, I felt completely empty. I was scrolling through Instagram, mindlessly double-tapping photos of people living seemingly perfect lives, when I caught my reflection in my phone's black screen during a loading pause. The man staring back at me looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, and somehow desperate, like he was searching for something he couldn't name. That's when it hit me. I had been living on autopilot for years, moving through a routine that someone else had designed for me. Wake up, check phone, consume coffee and news, work at a job that felt meaningless, consume entertainment, sleep, repeat. I was a hamster in a wheel, but the wheel was invisible, and I had been running so fast I never noticed I wasn't actually going anywhere. The breaking point came when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a genuine conversation with another human being. Even my interactions with friends had become performative, sharing memes, liking posts, exchanging surface-level pleasantries. When was the last time someone had asked me how I really felt, or when I'd asked myself that question? I tried to think of the last time I'd felt truly excited about something, passionate about anything, or even just present in my own life. The silence that followed that question was deafening. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned off all my devices and sat in complete silence. No music, no TV, no phone. Just me and the uncomfortable quiet of my own thoughts. What I discovered in that silence terrified me. I didn't know who I was anymore beneath all the digital noise and consumer desires that had been planted in my mind. I started Googling ironic. I know modern society, emptiness, and why does everything feel meaningless? That's when I stumbled across an article by Brandon William, a cultural critic and writer from Austin, Texas, who specialized in what he called the psychological warfare of modern capitalism. The article was titled "The Great Deception: How Modern Society Hijacked Your Soul and Sold It Back to You." It described exactly what I was experiencing, the feeling of being successful but empty, connected but lonely, entertained but profoundly bored. Brandon wrote, "We live in the most sophisticated system of control ever created. It doesn't use chains or bars, it uses desires, distractions, and the constant promise that happiness is just one purchase, one achievement, one notification away. The cruelest part, it makes you complicit in your own imprisonment." At 2 a.m., I did something that would change my life forever. I sent an email to a complete stranger. "Mr. William, I think I'm living the exact life you described in your article, and I feel like I'm suffocating. Can you help me understand how I got here and how to get out?" His response came within hours. "Wilson, recognizing the cage is the first step toward unlocking it. Most people never even see the bars. The question is, are you ready to learn what freedom actually looks like?" Chapter 2: The Diagnosis of Deception. 3 days later, I was on a video call with Brandon William, a man whose calm intensity reminded me of a doctor diagnosing a disease that had been spreading undetected for years. "Wilson," he began, "tell me about your typical day. But don't tell me what you do. Tell me how much of what you do feels like it comes from your own genuine desires versus external programming." The question hit me like a cold wave. As I walked through my daily routine, I realized that almost nothing I did felt authentically chosen. I woke up to an alarm designed to maximize productivity, checked apps that were engineered to be addictive, consumed news that was crafted to keep me anxious and engaged, worked at a job that felt disconnected from any meaningful purpose, and spent my evenings consuming entertainment designed to keep me passive and distracted. About 95% of my day feels automatic, I admitted. Like I'm following a script someone else wrote. That's because you are, Brandon replied. What you're experiencing is what Herbert Marcuse called one-dimensional thought, the systematic reduction of human consciousness to purely material and consumer concerns. You've been trained to confuse comfort with happiness, convenience with freedom, and stimulation with fulfillment. Brandon explained that modern society operates like a sophisticated drug dealer. It creates the problem, anxiety, emptiness, disconnection, and then sells you the solution, products, services, experiences that promise to fill the void but actually perpetuate it. He shared a case study from his research. I worked with a software engineer in Seattle named David, who had everything our society defines as success: six-figure salary, beautiful apartment, active social media presence, access to any entertainment he wanted. But he came to me because he was having panic attacks and couldn't understand why. What was wrong with him? I asked. Nothing was wrong with him. Everything was wrong with the system he was trapped in. David's panic attacks were his soul's way of screaming that he was living a life that had no connection to his authentic self. Brandon outlined what he called the modern deception framework, a systematic understanding of how contemporary society creates the illusion of freedom while actually controlling behavior, thoughts, and desires. The first principle, he explained, is understanding that you are not the customer in this system. You are the product. Your attention, your data, your emotional responses, your purchasing decisions, these are what's being harvested and sold. Lesson 1. The Attention Economy Audit. Brandon's first assignment was both simple and shocking. For 1 week, I want you to track where your attention goes. Every time you check your phone, watch TV, scroll social media, or consume any form of digital media, write down what you were feeling before you reached for the distraction. He explained that attention is the most valuable resource in the modern economy. Companies spend billions of dollars studying how to capture and hold your attention because whoever controls your attention controls your thoughts. And whoever controls your thoughts controls your behavior. This assignment revealed something disturbing. Almost every time I reached for my phone or turned on entertainment, I was trying to avoid some form of discomfort, boredom, anxiety, loneliness, or existential questions about my life's purpose. Your devices have become electronic pacifiers, Brandon observed when I shared my findings. Anytime you feel the slightest discomfort, you've been trained to reach for immediate relief. But discomfort is often your soul's way of telling you something needs to change. Chapter 3. The Manufactured Desires. During our second session, Brandon introduced me to what would become the most disturbing realization of my journey. Understanding how my desires had been manufactured by systems I wasn't even aware of. Wilson, I want you to think about your goals, your dreams, your ideas about what success looks like, he said. Now I want you to ask yourself, where did these ideas come from? Did they arise organically from your authentic self? Or were they planted there by advertising, social media, family expectations, and cultural programming? As I reflected on this question, a horrifying picture emerged. My desire for a luxury car, my obsession with career advancement, my need for social media validation, my constant urge to buy new things. None of these felt like they came from my genuine self. They felt like scripts I'd memorized so well I'd forgotten they weren't my own words. What you're discovering, Brandon explained, is what Marcuse called false needs, desires that are created by the system to keep you producing and consuming. The genius of modern capitalism is that it doesn't just sell you products. It sells you the very desires that make you want those products. He shared research from behavioral economists, showing how companies use sophisticated psychological techniques to create artificial scarcity, social pressure, and neurochemical addiction patterns. Think about it, Brandon continued. Why do you feel anxious when you don't check your phone for an hour? Why do you feel inadequate when you see others' social media posts? Why do you feel like you need to constantly upgrade, update, and consume new things? These feelings aren't natural, they're manufactured. Lesson 2. The Desire Archaeology. Brandon taught me a practice he called desire archaeology, tracing each of my wants and goals back to their source to determine which were authentic and which were implanted. For each thing you think you want, he instructed, ask yourself, when did I first want this? What was I consuming media, advertising, social content when this desire first appeared? How does wanting this make me feel about myself? If this desire disappeared tomorrow, would I miss it or would I feel relieved? The results were shocking. Most of my desires for expensive gadgets, designer clothes, social status, even certain relationship goals dissolved under examination. They weren't really mine. They were products I'd been sold by a system that profits from my dissatisfaction. The goal isn't to want nothing, Brandon clarified. It's to distinguish between desires that come from your authentic self and desires that have been programmed into you by external forces. Chapter 4. The Productivity Prison. 3 weeks into my awakening, Brandon introduced me to perhaps the most insidious aspect of modern society's control system, the cult of productivity. Wilson, you've been trained to believe that your worth as a human being is measured by your output, he said during our 4th session. You've internalized the logic of machines, that efficiency, optimization, and constant production are the highest values. He was right. I had been treating myself like a computer that needed to be constantly running programs, optimizing performance, and producing results. Even my leisure time had become productive. I read self-improvement books, took courses to advance my career, exercised to optimize my health metrics. But here's the cruel irony, Brandon continued. The more you optimize yourself for the system's definition of productivity, the less capable you become of the things that actually make life meaningful: creativity, authentic relationships, spiritual growth, and simply being present in your own existence. He shared a case study from his work with Rebecca, a marketing executive from Vancouver who had optimized her life to the point of breakdown. Rebecca tracked every aspect of her life: calories consumed, steps taken, hours slept, work tasks completed, social interactions quantified. She was incredibly productive by modern standards, but she felt like a robot. She had lost all connection to her intuition, her creativity, and her capacity for spontaneous joy. How did she change? I asked. She learned to distinguish between meaningful activity and busy work, between genuine growth and performative optimization. She discovered that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Lesson 3. The Productivity Detox. Brandon outlined a systematic approach to breaking free from productivity addiction. Week 1. Audit your activities. Identify which activities you do because they genuinely fulfill you. versus which you do because you think you should, or because they make you feel productive. Week 2. Practice purposeful inefficiency deliberately. Do things slowly, imperfectly, or just for the joy of doing them. Take long walks without podcasts. Cook a meal without photographing it. Have conversations without trying to network. Week 3. Embrace boredom. Stop filling every moment with activity. Sit with discomfort instead of immediately reaching for stimulation. Let your mind wander without directing it toward productive thoughts. Week 4. Redefine value. Start measuring the worth of activities by how they make you feel rather than what they accomplish. Prioritize being overdoing. This practice was incredibly difficult at first. My nervous system had become so accustomed to constant stimulation and optimization that stillness felt almost physically painful. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. My own authentic thoughts, desires, and creative impulses that had been buried under years of productivity programming. Chapter 5. The Social Media Mirage. A month into my journey, Brandon tackled what he called the most sophisticated manipulation tool ever created: social media. "Wilson, these platforms aren't neutral communication tools," he explained. "They're behavior modification systems designed to harvest your attention, manipulate your emotions, and shape your desires. The algorithms literally study your psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them." I had been spending 3 to 4 hours a day on various social platforms, but I'd never thought of them as manipulation systems. They just felt like normal life. Think about how you feel before, during, and after using social media. Brandon continued. Do you feel more connected to other humans? More satisfied with your own life? More present in your authentic experience? Or do you feel anxious, inadequate, and compulsively driven to check for more updates? The honest answer was disturbing. Social media made me feel worse about myself, more disconnected from real relationships, and constantly anxious about how I was being perceived by others. But I kept using it because the temporary hits of validation felt necessary for my emotional survival. What you're experiencing is classic addiction, Brandon explained. The platforms use variable reward schedules, the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive to keep you engaged. You never know when you'll get that hit of likes, comments, or shares, so you keep checking compulsively. Lesson 4. The Digital Detox Protocol. Brandon didn't recommend quitting social media cold turkey. Instead, he outlined a strategic approach to reclaiming agency over my digital consumption. Week 1. Awareness building. Install apps that track screen time and social media usage. Simply becoming conscious of how much time these platforms consume. Week 2. Intentional usage. Only check social media at specific times, for specific purposes, for limited durations. No mindless scrolling. Week 3. Content curation. Unfollow accounts that make you feel inadequate, angry, or compulsive. Follow accounts that genuinely inspire or educate without triggering comparison or envy. Week 4. Real-world priority. For every hour spent on social media, spend an equal amount of time in face-to-face interaction or solo reflection. The results were immediate and profound. As I reduced my social media consumption, I felt less anxious, more present, and more interested in my actual life rather than performing a version of it for online consumption. Chapter 6. The Consumer Identity Crisis. 2 months into working with Brandon, I faced a crisis that forced me to confront the deepest level of modern society's control. How I had confused consumption with identity. It started when I realized I literally didn't know who I was without my possessions and brands. When I tried to describe myself without mentioning what I owned, where I worked, or what I consumed, I came up blank. This is what I call consumer identity collapse, Brandon explained. The system has trained you to express your personality, values, and individuality through purchasing decisions. You've been taught that you are what you buy. He was right. I defined myself through my phone brand, my clothing labels, my streaming service subscriptions, my choice of coffee shop, my car, my apartment's aesthetic. But these weren't authentic expressions of self. They were products of marketing campaigns, designed to make me feel unique while actually making me predictable. The cruelest part, Brandon continued, is that consumer identity creates the illusion of choice while actually limiting your possibilities. You think you're expressing individuality by choosing between pre-packaged lifestyle options, but you're actually just selecting from a predetermined menu of ways to be controlled. Lesson 5. The Identity Archaeology. Brandon guided me through what he called identity archaeology, uncovering my authentic self beneath layers of consumer programming. Core values, excavation, identifying what I genuinely cared about when no one was watching and no purchases were involved. Childhood interest revival, reconnecting with activities and interests I'd enjoyed before marketing and social pressure shaped my preferences. Non-consumer expression, finding ways to express creativity, personality, and values that didn't involve buying anything. Relationship inventory, examining which relationships were based on shared consumption versus genuine connection. This process was both liberating and terrifying. As I stripped away the consumer layers of my identity, I discovered interests, values, and aspects of personality that had been dormant for years. But I also had to face the reality that many of my relationships and social connections were built around shared consumption patterns rather than authentic compatibility. Chapter 7. The Work-Life Integration Trap. 3 months into my transformation, Brandon introduced me to another layer of modern society's control system, how work had infiltrated every aspect of personal life. Wilson, you've been taught to see work-life balance as the goal, he said, but the real trap is deeper. You've internalized the logic of work so completely that you approach every aspect of life like a job to be optimized. He was absolutely right. I had been treating my relationships like networking opportunities, my hobbies like skill development, my health like a performance metric, and my personal growth like a career advancement strategy. This is what Marcuse called one-dimensional thought, Brandon explained. All human activities get reduced to economic logic. You can't just enjoy a sunset. You have to photograph it for social media. You can't just read a book. You have to extract actionable insights. You can't just spend time with friends. You have to consider how it benefits your personal brand. He shared a case study from his work with James, a consultant from London who had optimized his personal life so thoroughly that he'd lost the ability to experience spontaneous joy. James scheduled his fun, tracked his happiness, and measured his relationships. He was incredibly efficient at living, but he wasn't actually alive. He was managing his life instead of experiencing it. Lesson 6. The Reclamation of Useless Activities. Brandon's solution was counterintuitive, deliberately, engaging in activities that served no purpose other than their intrinsic value. Purposeless walking, taking walks without destinations, podcasts, or fitness tracking. Unproductive creation, making art, music, or writing that would never be shared or monetized. Inefficient socializing, spending time with people purely for enjoyment, not networking. Contemplative practices, meditation, prayer, or reflection without self-improvement goals. This practice felt revolutionary. For the first time in years, I was doing things simply because they felt good, not because they advanced any agenda or improved any metric. Chapter 8: The Anxiety Economy. 4 months into my journey, Brandon revealed what he considered the darkest aspect of modern society's manipulation: how it profits from manufactured anxiety. "Wilson, you've been living in a state of chronic low-level anxiety your entire adult life," he observed. "This isn't a personal failing, it's a feature of the system. Anxious people are profitable people." He explained how news media, social platforms, advertising, and even educational systems create and maintain anxiety to drive consumption and compliance. "Think about it," Brandon continued. "When you're anxious about your appearance, you buy beauty products. When you're anxious about your career, you buy courses and coaching. When you're anxious about missing out, you buy experiences. When you're anxious about the future, you buy insurance and investments. Anxiety is the fuel that keeps the consumption machine running." Lesson 7: The Anxiety Audit. Brandon taught me to distinguish between rational concerns and manufactured anxiety. Productive anxiety, concerns that motivate beneficial action and then resolve. Manufactured anxiety, persistent worry that drives consumption but never resolves. We identified the sources of my chronic anxiety: news consumption that kept me in a state of fear about events I couldn't control; social media that made me constantly compare myself to others; advertising that made me feel inadequate about my possessions and appearance; work culture that made me feel like I was always behind or at risk. As I eliminated these anxiety-generating inputs, I discovered that most of my worries weren't based on real threats, but on manufactured fears designed to keep me consuming. Chapter 9: The Authenticity Revolution. 6 months into my transformation, I experienced what Brandon called authenticity emergence, the gradual surfacing of my genuine self beneath years of social programming. It started with small things: preferring silence to background music, choosing comfort over style, saying no to social events that drained me, pursuing interests that served no career purpose. But gradually, these small choices accumulated into a completely different way of being. "What you're experiencing," Brandon explained, "is the revolutionary act of being yourself in a system designed to prevent that. Authentic people are dangerous to the consumer economy because they can't be easily manipulated or predicted." The changes were profound. I felt calmer and more centered. My relationships became deeper and more genuine. I discovered creative interests I'd forgotten I had. I made decisions based on my own values rather than external expectations. I felt present in my own life for the first time in years. Lesson 8: The Authenticity Practices. Brandon outlined daily practices for maintaining authenticity in a deceptive system. Morning intention setting, starting each day by connecting with my own values and desires, rather than immediately consuming external input. Media hygiene, carefully curating what information and entertainment I consumed. Relationship boundaries, spending time only with people who accepted my authentic self. Consumer consciousness, making purchasing decisions based on genuine need rather than manufactured desire. Regular solitude, creating time for reflection and connection with my inner voice. Chapter 10: The Ripple Effect. As I became more authentic and less susceptible to social manipulation, something unexpected happened. Other people began to notice and ask questions. My colleague Sarah mentioned that I seemed calmer and more present. My brother commented that I was more fun to be around because I wasn't constantly checking my phone. Friends began asking for advice about feeling overwhelmed and empty in their own lives. Brandon explained that authenticity is contagious. When people see someone living genuinely, it reminds them that it's possible. You become living proof that there's an alternative to the hamster wheel. I began sharing what I'd learned with friends and family members who were struggling with their own modern malaise. My roommate David started implementing some of the digital detox practices. My sister Emma began questioning her own consumer habits. Lesson 9. The authentic influence. The most powerful form of social change, Brandon taught me, is simply being an example of what's possible. You don't need to preach or convince anyone. Just live authentically, and you'll naturally inspire others to consider their own choices. Chapter 11. The economic independence. 8 months into my transformation, I made a decision that shocked everyone who knew me. I quit my high-paying corporate job to pursue work that felt meaningful. The decision wasn't reckless. As I'd eliminated unnecessary consumption from my life, I'd discovered I needed far less money than I'd thought. Without the constant pressure to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like, my expenses had dropped dramatically. I started freelance writing and consulting work that aligned with my values. The income was lower, but the quality of life was immeasurably higher. This is what real freedom looks like, Brandon observed. Not the freedom to buy anything you want, but the freedom to choose work that reflects your values and contributes something meaningful to the world. Lesson 10. The Freedom Formula. Brandon's formula for economic independence was simple but revolutionary. Reduce artificial needs equals increase real choices. By eliminating manufactured desires, I had liberated both time and money to pursue what actually mattered to me. Chapter 12. The Community Building. A year after my first desperate email to Brandon, I found myself in an unexpected role, helping to build a community of people who had awakened from modern society's deception. It started as an informal discussion group with friends who were interested in living more authentically. But it grew into a regular gathering of people committed to supporting each other's journey toward genuine freedom. We shared strategies for resisting manipulation, celebrated small acts of authenticity, and created accountability for maintaining conscious choices in an unconscious world. Brandon helped me understand that community is essential for maintaining authenticity. Isolation makes you vulnerable to social programming, but a community of conscious people creates a different kind of social pressure. Pressure to be genuine rather than to conform, the teaching moment. The most rewarding aspect of my transformation was watching others experience their own awakening. When my friend Mark realized he'd been using shopping as emotional regulation, when my sister Emma discovered she could enjoy social events without documenting them online, when my colleague David found the courage to pursue his artistic interests, despite social pressure to focus on career advancement, each person's awakening created ripples that influenced their own networks, creating an expanding circle of people choosing authenticity over performance. Epilogue. The ongoing revolution. As I write this story, 18 months have passed since that Wednesday evening when I first realized I was living in a beautiful prison. The transformation has been so profound that sometimes I can barely remember what it felt like to live on autopilot, constantly seeking external validation and consuming my way through existential emptiness. But the real measure of change isn't how I feel. It's how I relate to the world around me. I can now navigate modern society without being controlled by it. I can use technology without being used by it. I can participate in the economy without being enslaved to it. Most importantly, I've learned that the greatest rebellion against a system designed to control your mind is simply to think for yourself. The most radical act in a consumer society is to be satisfied with what you have. The most revolutionary choice in a world of manufactured anxiety is to be at peace. The message for others. To anyone who recognizes themselves in the person I used to be, successful but empty, connected but lonely, entertained but profoundly bored, I want you to know that awakening is possible. You don't have to continue living as a product in someone else's economic system. You don't have to keep consuming your way through existential emptiness. You don't have to remain trapped in the beautiful prison of modern convenience and constant stimulation. The practical beginning. If you're ready to begin this journey, start with Brandon's first lesson. For 1 week, track where your attention goes. Notice what you are feeling every time you reach for distraction. This simple practice will begin to reveal the extent to which your consciousness has been hijacked by external systems. From there, you can start making different choices. Small ones at first, but increasingly significant as you develop confidence in your own judgment and rediscover your authentic desires. The final truth. The great deception of modern society isn't that it promises happiness and delivers suffering. It's subtler and more insidious. It teaches you to confuse stimulation with satisfaction, convenience with freedom, and consumption with identity. But once you see through the deception, you can't unsee it. Once you taste authentic freedom, you can't go back to the comfortable slavery of unconscious consumption. Once you remember who you are beneath all the programming, you can't pretend to be someone else's idea of success. The path back to authenticity isn't easy, and it's rarely popular, but it's the only path that leads to genuine satisfaction, real relationships, and the profound peace that comes from living as yourself rather than as a character in someone else's story. Your authentic life is waiting on the other side of all the noise. The question isn't whether you can find it. The question is whether you have the courage to turn off the distractions long enough to remember who you really are. I claim my time. The revolution begins within, and it begins with you.